I still remember the exact moment. Everything shifted. Not because something dramatic happened right away, but because I felt that familiar tightening in my chest that tells you trouble is coming. The kind where you already know this is not going to be a small thing. Not this time. I was just rolling down the sidewalk. Same route I'd taken 100 times before. Sun out, birds loud, sprinklers clicking somewhere behind the hedges when I saw her standing there with her arms crossed like she'd been waiting for me specifically. Let me rewind a little because context matters here. I was born with a neuromuscular condition that basically means my legs never worked and my upper body strength is limited on a good day. So, I use an electric wheelchair to get around. Not a scooter, not some tricked-out machine, just a standard chair that moves at about the speed of a distracted pedestrian. I've used it my entire life, which means I've had a lifetime to get used to people staring, whispering, asking dumb questions, or pretending I'm invisible. Most days I can brush it off. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood that honestly feels like a miracle sometimes. Wide sidewalks, proper curb ramps, smooth pavement, neighbors who walk their dogs and wave, kids riding bikes without a care in the world. I work from home doing bookkeeping and tax prep for small businesses. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me independence. Doctors once told my parents I probably never have. I own my place. I pay my dues. I mind my business. The only real downside is the HOA. If you've ever lived under one, you already know what I mean. Most of them are background noise, rules about trash cans and lawn height that no one really enforces. But every now and then, you get someone who treats that little bit of authority like it's a crown. And in my neighborhood, that person was a woman named Cynthia Bell. Cynthia wasn't officially the president, but she might as well have been. She knew every bylaw by heart, or at least claimed she did, and she loved reminding people that she was on the board. She drove a spotless white SUV, always wore sunglasses, even when it was cloudy, and had this way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes. From the moment I moved in, I could tell she didn't like me. Though at first I couldn't put my finger on why, it started small comments here and there, little looks of disapproval when she saw me outside during the day. Once when I was checking my mail, she casually asked if I was home all day every day. And before I could answer, she laughed and said, "Must be nice living off the system." I remember freezing, not because I didn't have a response, but because I was tired. Tired in that deep way you get when you've had to justify your existence to strangers your entire life. I told her calmly that I work full-time. She waved her hand like she was brushing away a fly and said something about how taxes pay for everything anyway. That was my first real clue that this wasn't just ignorance. It was something uglier. Over time escalated. She told me once that she didn't think homeowners like me were good for property values. Another time she hinted that prospective buyers might feel uncomfortable seeing me rolling around. The worst part was how casually she said these things like they were obvious truths everyone secretly agreed with. I tried ignoring her because honestly, what else do you do? Then one afternoon, she stopped me right outside my driveway and said very seriously that I wasn't allowed to be outside during certain hours. I actually laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. She wasn't laughing. She said the HOA had rules about when residents could be visible, especially those using motorized equipment. I asked her to show me the rule. She couldn't. She just gestured in my chair and said something about nighttime being more appropriate, less disruptive. I remember thinking I must be misharing her because who says that out loud in the 21st century? I told her she was wrong and she snapped back that she knew the bylaws better than I ever would. That was the day I stopped feeling annoyed and started feeling angry. Still, I kept living my life. I went on my daily rolls around the block, waved to the neighbors who waved back, tried not to let one miserable person shrink my world, until the day she decided to escalate things in a way I never saw coming. It was a Saturday afternoon, perfect weather, the kind that makes staying inside feel like a waste. I was halfway through my loop when I noticed a police cruiser pull up ahead of me. Then another, then another. For a split second, I wondered if something terrible had happened nearby. Then one of the officers looked directly at me, confused, scanning the sidewalk like he was searching for something that wasn't there. Cynthia was standing a few feet away, practically vibrating with excitement. An officer approached me and asked if I'd seen a vehicle driving on the sidewalk. I blinked at him and said, "You're looking at it." He frowned, glanced at my chair, then back at his radio like it had betrayed him. That's when Cynthia stepped in loud enough for everyone to hear, saying that I'd been terrorizing the neighborhood, running over kids, chasing dogs, ruining the peace. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But judging by the officer's face, neither could he. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just about her not liking me. This was about control, about power, about someone deciding I didn't belong in my own neighborhood. And trust me, this was only the beginning. The officer stood there for a moment, looking between me, my chair, and Cynthia like they were trying to figure out how they'd ended up in some kind of alternate reality where words didn't mean what they used to mean. One of them finally cleared his throat and asked her very carefully to explain what she meant by vehicle. She pointed at me, her fingers stiff, her mouth already curled in triumph, and said, "That thing, she drives it up and down the sidewalk all day long. It's dangerous. It's illegal. And frankly, it's disturbing." I remember thinking how strange it was that she kept saying it. Not he, not she, just that like if she stripped away enough humanity, her story would make more sense. The officer crouched slightly so he could speak to me at eye level, which I appreciated more than he probably realized, and asked how fast my chair went. I told him the truth that at full speed it topped out around 4 miles per hour, less if the battery was low. He nodded and said, "So basically a brisk walk." Then he stood up, turned to Cynthia, and explained that electric wheelchairs are legally considered mobility devices, not motor vehicles, and that sidewalks are exactly where they're supposed to be. She didn't like that answer at all. She crossed her arms tighter and said, "Well, then she should be in the street because she's in the way out here." That's when the second officer chimed in, pointing out that forcing a wheelchair user into the street would actually be dangerous and that if anything, that would be the real violation. Cynthia's face flushed red, and for a split second, I thought she might actually explode. Instead, she did something almost impressive in its audacity. She smiled and said, "Fine. If you won't arrest her, then I'll handle it through the HOA. No motors on the sidewalk. I'm issuing a fine." The officer sighed, the kind of sigh that comes from someone who's had a very long career dealing with people who refuse to hear the word no. He told her firmly that issuing fines based on made-up rules was a bad idea and that she should probably leave me alone. Then he turned back to me, apologized for the hassle, and told me to have a good day. As they drove away, Cynthia didn't say another word. She just stared at me with this look that made my skin crawl, like she'd lost a battle, but was already planning the war. I went home shaking, not from fear exactly, but from adrenaline, anger, and this deep old sadness I hadn't felt in years. It's exhausting realizing that no matter how quiet you live, no matter how much you follow the rules, someone can still decide your problem just for existing. For a while, I considered letting it go. People like Cynthia thrive on reaction, and part of me hoped that embarrassing her in front of the police might be enough to make her back off. But instead of fading into the background, she got bolder. I heard from neighbors that she was complaining about me at HOA meetings, calling me disruptive, saying I scared potential buyers, claiming she was just looking out for the community. That's when something in me snapped. Not in a dramatic yelling way, but in a quiet, resolute way. I realized that as long as she had power, even a little bit of it, she wasn't going to stop. And if I wanted things to change, I couldn't just avoid her. I had to confront the system that gave her that power in the first place. So, I decided to run for the HOA board. It wasn't some grand ambition. I didn't dream of enforcing bylaws or arguing about lawn ornaments. I just wanted a seat at the table, a voice, a way to make sure no one else in this neighborhood ever felt the way I had. I met all the requirements, owned my home outright, paid my dues on time, no violations. On paper, there was no reason I shouldn't be allowed to run. When Cynthia found out, she cornered me in the clubhouse hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. She didn't bother pretending to be polite this time. She leaned in close and said, "You really think people want someone like you making decisions for them?" I asked her what she meant by that, already knowing the answer. She scoffed and said, "Don't play dumb. You're a liability and I'll make sure your name never makes it onto a ballot." There it was clear as day. I told her she couldn't do that. She laughed and said, "Watch me." Election season came. Notices went out. Neighbors chatted about candidates. And when the ballots were finally posted, my name wasn't there. At first, I felt that familiar wave of doubt, the one that makes you question yourself, wonder if you messed something up, missed a deadline, So, I checked my records. Then, I checked them again. Everything was there. Form submitted, deadlines met, confirmation emails saved. I emailed the HOA. No response. I called, voicemail. When I finally got someone on the line, they said it must have been a clerical error and suggested I try again next year. That's when the anger came back hotter this time, sharper because now I knew for sure this wasn't a misunderstanding. I started researching, not out of spite, but out of self-defense. That's when I dug into disability law, specifically the Americans with Disabilities Act, and realized just how deep a hole Cynthia had dug for herself. The 88 doesn't just apply to employers or public buildings. It covers organizations, housing associations, any entity that offers services or opportunities to the public or its members. Blocking a qualified candidate from running because of a disability isn't just wrong, it's illegal. So, I called a lawyer. Saying it out loud for the first time felt surreal, like I was stepping into a version of my life I never expected to live. I wasn't suing because I wanted money. I was suing because someone had crossed a line, and if I didn't push back, she'd keep crossing it with me or with someone else. When Cynthia was served, the shift was immediate. Suddenly, emails started pouring in from the HOA, apologetic, overly polite, full of phrases like unfortunate oversight and filing mistake. They said they'd be happy to make sure everything went smoothly next year if I just dropped the case. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. He sent back a single letter telling them to stop contacting me directly and to route all communication through him. After that, the silence was deafening, the kind that tells you people are scrambling behind closed doors. Court day came faster than I expected. I rolled into that courtroom feeling smaller than I ever had and stronger at the same time. I told the judge exactly what Cynthia had said to me, word for word. I explained why I wanted to run, not for power, but for fairness, for accountability. My lawyer presented the HOA records showing my application had been received and then mysteriously disappeared. When it was Cynthia's turn to speak, she claimed it was all a misunderstanding, a paperwork issue, an honest mistake. But the other board members, faced with the reality of legal consequences, cracked. They admitted that Cynthia had told them not to put my name on the ballot. One of them even said she'd threatened them if they spoke up. I didn't look at her while they talked. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of the room shifting, the story changing from accident to pattern, from coincidence to discrimination. And I knew sitting there that no matter what happened next, she was never going to look at that power the same way again. The judge didn't rule immediately. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and asked a few very calm, very precise questions that somehow felt sharper than any accusation. She asked Cynthia why the paperwork had only gone missing in my case. She asked why multiple board members remembered being told not to include my name. She asked why, if this was a simple clerical error, no one had contacted me before ballots went out. Cynthia's answers kept getting shorter. Her voice lost that confident edge she'd always had in the neighborhood. By the end, she wasn't explaining anymore. She was deflecting, and everyone in that room could feel it. When the ruling came, it was firm and unambiguous. The HOA had violated federal disability law. Full stop. The judge didn't sugarcoat it. She said organizations like HOAs don't get to hide behind paperwork when discrimination is this clear. The association was fined heavily enough that you could see the treasurer physically wheeze. Cynthia herself was fined personally. Not huge, but symbolic. The kind of fine that says this one's on you. The judge also ordered a new election. That should have been the triumphant moment, right? The part where I finally get what I fought for. Funny thing is, sitting there, as everyone packed up their folders and avoided eye contact, I realized I didn't want the board seat anymore. Not because I was afraid, but because the fight had already done what I needed it to do. The system had been forced into the light. News travels fast in a neighborhood like ours. Within days, everyone knew what had happened, though the versions varied wildly depending on who was telling the story. Some people acted embarrassed, some apologetic, some suddenly very friendly. Cynthia didn't say a word to me. She stopped attending meetings. A week later, she resigned from the board along with two others who suddenly claimed they needed to focus on family matters. The new election went forward. Anyway, this is the part that still gets me. A guy named Mark who lived a few streets over rolled up to one of the informational meetings in his own chair. I'd seen him around before, but never really talked to him. Turns out he'd been dealing with his own quiet battles, small comments, subtle exclusions, things that never quite rose to the level of open conflict, but still chipped away at him. He decided to run for one of the open seats. He won. Watching him take that spot felt better than winning myself ever could have. He wasn't loud about it, wasn't dramatic. He just showed up, asked thoughtful questions, pushed back when things didn't feel fair. The tone of the board shifted almost immediately. Rules started being applied evenly. Complaints stopped being personal. Funny how that works. As for Cynthia, she didn't move away or anything like that. She still lives here. I see her sometimes, usually from a distance. She avoids eye contact now, crosses the street if she has to. The sharp looks are gone. So is the confidence. Power suits some people and it exposes others. Life settled into a new normal after that. I went back to my routine, my work, my daily rolls through the neighborhood. The sidewalks didn't change, but the way I felt using them did. I wasn't bracing myself anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next confrontation. I felt like I belonged. Not because anyone granted me permission, but because I refused to accept that I didn't. Every now and then, I think about how close I came to just letting it go. How easy it would have been to stay quiet, keep my head down, tell myself it wasn't worth the stress. And maybe for some people in some situations, that's the right choice. But this time, it wasn't. This wasn't really about an HOA or a sidewalk or even Cynthia. It was about what happens when someone decides they get to define who counts as normal, who counts as valuable, who gets to take up space. It was about how small abuses of power grow when no one challenges them. I didn't set out to be some kind of example. I just wanted to go outside without being treated like a problem. But standing up for that changed more than I expected. Not just for me, but for people who were watching quietly wondering if they could do the same. And here's the thing that still sticks with me. Cynthia never once apologized. Not to me, not publicly, not privately. In a strange way, I'm okay with that. Accountability doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it just comes with consequences and that has to be enough. So, I'll leave you with this. If you live in a neighborhood like mine where someone used a little bit of authority to decide who belonged and who didn't, what would you do? Would you ignore it and hope it burns out? Would you push back quietly? Or would you do what I did and force the issue into the open knowing it might get messy? I'm genuinely curious where you draw that line. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you probably think. And if you've ever dealt with something like this, whether it was an HOA, a workplace, or just someone who thought they had the right to control your space, share your story, too. Someone out there might need to hear it. If you found the story worth telling, give the video a like. Maybe share it with someone who's been feeling small lately. And if you want more real stories about everyday power struggles and the people who push back, make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one. Like, share and subscribe. HOA Battelle.